the diversity of opinions among students who should be recruited to do Hasbara.
It was something, I remember reading a summary about it. The less affiliated students are apparently the ones who are becoming more and more involved.
That's correct.
Which was my case. Being that, I grew up the child of a mixed marriage. My late father was Puerto Rican. He wasn't Jewish. My mom is Jewish. And growing up, I had very little connection to Israel. The traditional every now and again Jewish holiday, but we also celebrated Christian holidays, not for religious purposes, but just for, with my father's family. Being that I grew up in New York, went to public school my entire life, all of my friends weren't Jewish, it was just much easier for me to associate or be a part of a group of people that, had no affiliation to being Jewish or to Israel. My last name was Rojas. No one ever asked me a question about Israel. Very rarely did I get a question about being Jewish. So the entire issue of Israel activism or Israel advocacy was something that I came into much later on. For me, it's fascinating working today with 16, 17, 18-year-old high school students who are so passionate about Israel, who want to educate others. And when I was 16 or 17, I was much less concerned with the things that they are. But I think it says a lot about this generation, the seriousness of these issues. For me, it was 9/11 that really affected my life. I was 16 years old on September 11th. I had just started my junior year of high school. I'm in a high school of over 3,000 students, and there are 2 Jewish kids in my school, myself and my younger brother. And that's when the questions started to unfold suddenly about Israel, about the conflict, and I didn't have answers. And my curiosity is really what led me into wanting to learn more about Israel. And when I reached university 2 years later, I was shocked by what professors were saying, by what classmates of mine were saying. I was a political science, Middle Eastern studies major, and Israel was the bad guy. And people who stood up for Israel were labeled as such. And I went from a reality of being president of my class each consecutive year of high school, representing my high school in the New York City Student Council, helping to represent New York City on the State Student Council, always being a student leader on top of the world. Everyone knew me. I knew everyone, to feeling really isolated and left out in my university experience because I had chosen to become this voice for Israel. And it's not an easy decision. I joke that because I grew up in a rough neighborhood and I'm a minority. I grew up, my parents taught me not to be afraid of anything, and maybe that's what helps me. But for many of my friends who, like me, wanted to defend Israel, to educate about Israel, a lot of times, sadly, they were intimidated. And I think that's something that today I dedicate my life to, is to making sure that students who want to teach about Israel and who want to have fair, open, and honest conversations with their affinity and love for the country, and even sometimes their criticisms, are allowed to do that in a safe environment. So,
how do you deal with somebody who has criticisms? How do you tell them?
I always give them the New York City tourist experience.
Okay.
Being a young woman that grew up in New York City, our subway system is terrible. I mean, it's very difficult to understand. People who live their entire life don't understand it. So whenever I see tourists and I see them kind of struggling with the maps, I always approach them and ask them, do you need help? Where are you trying to get to? And it's usually the World Trade Center or Macy's, Ground Zero, Central Park. And what I say to my students is the same way I wouldn't tell someone, hey, why don't you get on the train with me and I'll take you to my housing project in Queens and I'll show you the real side of New York City. Because the real side of New York City is not the tourist attractions of Central Park and Times Square. It's a lot more. It's a lot more complex. We have real issues in New York. The same way we have real issues in Israel. And I think there's a time and a place for that discussion. And it's about understanding the beauty and the complexity of this place, being able to have those criticisms, which are absolutely fair, but also being able to put them into the perspective of not holding Israel to a different standard than any other nation, not expecting from Israel more or less than what any of us would expect from our own home countries and societies, and being able to just look at the relevance of issues that we have here in Israel, very serious issues like racism or discrimination that, yes, exists here, and there are instances, the same way there are instances in New York and Chicago and Paris and London and every great country around the world, and that's how I deal with those issues.
What's the one tool that you think a person would need to be an Israel advocate?
I think being fearless. I think it's two things. I think it's being fearless and being passionate. Israel, in today's conversation, this conflict has become the issue. And I think many people are shying away from dealing with it for one reason or another. It's just because, it's too messy, I don't want to get into it. It can cost me friends, it can cost me a job, anything else. And I think when you have that passion about something and you care about it so much, and I think if more young people understood, more young Jewish people understood that this place is a part of them, they are a part of it inherently, they would be invested in it. The same way that I can get aggravated over something my older sister said, right? And she'll annoy me, or she'll do something that really, really angers me. She's still my sister, and I still love her, and I would still defend her until the end of time. And that's how I look at Israel. We can be confused, we can be annoyed, but because of that love, because of that connection, I think we have to invest the time into learning more about it. So passion and fearlessness.
What would you say to somebody to bring them here? Israel
is the place to be. The first time I came here, I was nearly 19 years old, and I remember saying to someone, should I bring a helmet? Should I wear a bulletproof vest? What's going to happen? Are there people running around shooting and blowing up? And I was petrified. And someone reminded me, they said, don't worry, Michelle, where you grew up in Queens, there was a much better chance of something happening to you than you being in Israel on a visit. And it's true. Use Israel as your classroom. Be here, live it, love it, learn it. Eat with the people, speak to the people. You'll learn the most here, not from any expert, from the taxi drivers. Take taxis, get on buses. And once you feel the vibrancy and the diversity of this country, a country that's truly a democracy in action, that's when you can go back and say, I've experienced it. And that's the best knowledge that anyone can gain, a first-hand perspective on what it means to not just want to educate or defend Israel or the Israeli government or the Israeli army, but the average Israeli. Come here and learn what it is to be an Israeli.